Hey friends, welcome back to For Love and Justice. I'm Elise, and although I don't want to touch today's topic with a 10-foot pole, I do feel that I need to speak on it and clear up a few things. Charlie Kirk was assassinated recently. That's a tragedy. But I'm not here today to dissect the assassination like every other news outlet is doing. I am here to analyze how people reacted afterward and what that says about us right now. Here's what happened to me. I saw more outrage over Kirk's death than other acts of political violence. Senator Melissa Hortman and her husband were killed just a couple months ago. And an elementary school shooting happened the same day as Kirk's assassination, but this one dominated the feeds. Some of the people posting outrage were people I'd completely forgotten existed on my friends list. They've never used their platform before this. Caring about one incident while ignoring so many others, that's called selective empathy. Outrage is distributed unevenly, often along political lines. Tragedies affecting people outside of your ideological bubble barely register, while a single act becomes a lightning rod for performative rage. Then a relative slid into my DMs and accused me of celebrating something I hadn't even commented on, interacted with the first 24 hours because we were still processing. The shooter wasn't even caught. There were no hard facts yet before people started pointing the finger. So how could I, right? I was waiting to have an informed opinion or something to say on this before I spoke. The Wall Street Journal falsely reported about pro-trans inscriptions on the bullet because when we jump to conclusions, we find a boogeyman come hell or high water. And while Charlie Kirk's assassination is a tragedy, it should not happen to anyone. Political violence is a problem in this country. There's something thick in the air lately. And what we should really be noticing is how the right turned on their fellow neighbor in their rush to blame. Let's unpack it. So here's what happened after Charlie Kirk's assassination. Initial news reports broke the story. The shooter's identity and motive were not yet confirmed. Police were still investigating. No facts had been established. Within hours, conservative leaders and media figures began framing the narrative, claiming the, quote, radical left was responsible, even though the alleged shooter was later identified as a 22-year-old white Christian male from a MAGA family. Social media erupted before he was caught, with right-wing pundits and influencers amplifying the blame, often using emotionally charged language, memes, and conspiracy-driven claims, while also claiming some kind of moral high ground. And here's the problem. Many of the people pointing fingers were the very same people who've spent years criticizing, politicizing tragedy. And yet they exploited this incident to assign blame without evidence. Meanwhile, countless Americans who have been advocating for gun control and fighting against gun violence were accused by implication despite decades of activism aimed at preventing exactly this kind of tragedy. Why does this happen? Because assigning blame is easier than accountability. It's simpler to point at an ideological opponent, a boogeyman if you will, than to examine the culture that encourages rage, guns as identity, and violence as a virtue. Those who champion personal responsibility often refuse to take any themselves, even when the violent culture they've helped normalize comes back around. Logic, facts, and basic timelines were ignored in favor of outrage. Projection replaced reason, and the rush to blame became a spectacle in itself. So who actually did it? Who actually committed this heinous crime? Here's the kicker. The alleged shooter was a 22-year-old white Christian male from a MAGA family. He was not on the radical left, not even close. Even his own grandmother has set the record straight. They are a MAGA household. She does not know any Democrat relatives. And yet, in the hours following, conservative leaders and media figures immediately blamed the left, painting a picture of radical left lunatics as the source of violence. That's called projection, plain and simple. They hear their own violent rhetoric echoed back and mistake it for something coming from their opponents. This is exactly the kind of misdirection that fuels fear, division, and more violence. Heated reactions, assumptions, and finger-pointing do not honor the truth or the victim. They only make the culture more combustible. So where are the leaders? What are they doing? What are they saying, right? Well, Democratic leaders and former presidents condemned the violence. President Trump, however, blamed the radical left for the assassination. Other right-wing leaders and media figures amplified similar claims. And here's the thing, y'all. Politics is not a sport. Human lives are at stake. When we dehumanize each other, when we reduce it all to us versus them, when we refuse to tell the truth about what actually drives violence in this country, we make more room for it. So we've analyzed the response, the reaction, the big reaction. Now I want to analyze the culture that we have built. Because violence doesn't happen in a vacuum. It emerges from a culture where outrage is currency, where rage is performative, where online memes and identity politics collide into something combustible. Keep in mind the bullets that were found with inscriptions on them. I'm not going to go through what all they were, but they were internet memes. This man was deeply, deeply online and radicalized online. As well as when leaders and media assume the worst in others, it trickles down. It's the only thing that trickles down, but it does trickle down. When talking heads amplify it, it becomes normalized to suspect, fear, and demonize our neighbors. And here's the lesson. We need to assume the best in our neighbors, even when the political climate screams otherwise. That doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means refusing to weaponize tragedy to score points or stoke fear. But there's another piece we need to talk about. The environment where all this festers, which is social media. When a tragedy happens, the first place people turn is their feeds, unfortunately. And what they see depends entirely on the echo chamber they are in. Same event, completely different realities. Now, do you have people in the fringes celebrating? Sure. We can't tell people how to act. That's part of freedom of speech. And for those saying Charlie Kirk was a proponent of free speech, I don't see how getting people fired from their jobs is honoring him. If he's about free speech, he was about free speech, right? But anyway, I digress. Back to the echo chambers. These echo chambers don't shape the story after the fact. They shape the people who eventually commit violence. We've seen again and again that young men, especially white young men, are radicalized in online spaces. They've spaces that men like Charlie Kirk and Nick Fuentes have put their name on, have made their mark on. They fed a steady diet of grievance, of us versus them, of women and minorities being to blame for their problems. Violence gets packaged as masculine, as heroic, even as funny, turned into memes that normalize and encourage it. If you can read this, you're gay. LMAO was one of the bullet inscriptions. That matters here because the man who assassinated Charlie Kirk didn't come from the so-called radical left. He came from the same right-wing ecosystem that's been cultivating rage and isolation in young men for years. The same echo chamber that tells them they're victims, that they need to fight back, that violence is the answer. So when conservatives immediately pointed fingers at their opponents, what they really did was ignore their own reflection. The culture that radicalized this shooter isn't new, and it isn't imported from somewhere else. It's homegrown. In summation, all of this is tragic. Charlie Kirk's death was tragic, and what's happening now in the aftermath is tragic. The overreactions and false narratives that followed are also dangerous. The right-wing overreaction shows projection, selective empathy, and mistrust at work. So guys, stay awake, stay compassionate, stay human, and assume the best in your neighbors. That's how we build a culture that values life over outrage. Thank you for listening.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.